Hey everyone, this is Vaishali Siddhappa and welcome to my channel Complemental Economics, and today's topic it is deficit. Before that, let's understand few of the basic concepts. What is budget is all about? The budget means whenever any economy should run smoothly in any of the year, for that the planning is really very important. When it comes to budget, the most important topics we're going to discuss, that is receipts and the expenditure. What is receipts means and what is expenditure means? The receipts means the income, the money, what is earned by government. So that's called receipts. On the other side, the expenditure means whatever receipts they have got, from out of it they are going to spend that money for economy welfare. For an example, we need infrastructure, we need industries, we need drinking water facilities, we need education. Like this, on a lot of things the government is going to spend money on economy. That's called expenditure. The money what government is going to receive, that's called government revenue, public revenue. On the other side, the government, they're going to spend money, lot of money on public. That's called public expenditure. So in this way, when we are talking about the public revenue and the public expenditure, so the previous videos of mine, it is a classification of revenue and the classification of expenditure. Now we have one of a topic, that is deficit related topic. Briefly explain the revenue deficit and fiscal deficit. First of all, let me explain you what is the meaning of deficit here. The deficit means shortage. A simple meaning of that is a shortage. So where revenue is greater than the expenditure. The deficit means where revenue is greater than the expenditure. I'll give you one more explanation of it. Just imagine government is getting 1000 rupees as an income and they're spending 1200 rupees. That means they have a shortage of money. They have 1000 rupees and they have to spend 1200 rupees. So in that case, they have 200 rupees shortage of money for the public expenditure. So in this case, where public expenditure is greater than the public revenue. So public expenditure is greater than the revenue. That situation is called revenue. That situation is called as a deficit here. When it comes to deficit, there are so many different kinds of deficit we have. In that, the three different deficit we're going to talk, that is revenue deficit, fiscal deficit and primary deficit. So this particular question, it is about revenue deficit and the fiscal deficit. In this particular question, I am not going to discuss primary deficit. It is one of the 6-mark question in this chapter. So let's talk about the first topic, that is revenue deficit. What is the meaning of revenue deficit? Where revenue expenditure is greater than the revenue receipts. I just told you now what is the meaning of receipts. Receipt means the income which is collected by the government. The income is lesser than the expenditure. If the receipts is for 1000 rupees, the expenditure for 1200 rupees, the 200 rupees shortage what we are going to face, that's called revenue deficit. To find out the revenue deficit, the formula is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. All the formulas, so I'm going to talk about at the ending, the last slide of this video. So next here, after talking about what is revenue deficit, we have to talk about the revenue deficit includes only such transaction that affects the current income and the expenditure. The current, that means this year, this year income what we are going to get. Income is nothing but the receipts, and the expenditure what we are doing from the government. The current income and the expenditure of this year particular income. When any government incurs a revenue deficit, this particular topic is a revenue deficit, it implies that government is dissaving. So the government is not able to save because expenditure is greater than the receipts. So when expenditure is greater than the receipts, government cannot save. At the same time, what they do is they use all the savings what they have done. whatever the savings they have done from the other sectors, they are going to use that all the finance for the sake of consumption expenditure. See, the expenditure is greater than the revenue. In this case, the expenditure is greater than receipts. In that case, government cannot save. So they'll start using up all the savings till now, whatever the money they have saved till now, they're going to use that for the sake of consumption expenditure. The most important expenditure in any economy, that's a consumption expenditure. For the day-to-day life, to lead to the public, whatever the things they need, they're going to demand. For that sake, the government is going to spend all that saving which they have saved till now for the consumption expenditure. And after that, not only using the saving part, if it is not enough, what they will do it is, this will lead to a build up a stock of a debt. So they have to borrow money because they do not have any option. The saving what they have, they've already used, and still they're facing the deficit. So they have to borrow money. Why they have to borrow money? For the sake of investment, for the sake of consumption. In economy, for the lot of issues, for the lot of areas, we have to invest money. At the same time, for the day-to-day life, we have to consume goods and services. For that reason, for the investment sake, for the consumption sake, the government is going to borrow money. Like this, by borrowing more and more money, the stock of debt is going to increase. So don't you think it leads to a more and more building up the stock? So stock of debt, continuously I have a deficit, so I'm borrowing money from internal and external sectors. So because of this, the debt ratio is going to increase. If debt is increasing, interest rate is also going to increase. Interest liabilities, that means one or the other day I have to pay it back. I have to pay borrowings also. At the same time, I have to pay interest rate also. This will force the government to cut off all the expenditure. Whatever the expenditure they are doing, the more expenditure, the maximum expenditures, they have to reduce it. They do not have any options because the expenditure is increasing. Their borrowings also going to increase. Because of that, it is nothing but one or the other day you have to pay to others. For that reason, it's very important to cut the expenditure of the economy. From where they can cut the expenditure? See, the most important part of a revenue expenditure, it is a committed one. You cannot change at all. So few of the committed expenditure, that means, for an example, for the defense, internal and external security, it can be for the food, it can be for the education, it can be for the health infrastructure, it can be for the transportation. These are the very basic infrastructure which is demanded by the government. So demanded by the people and the government. So that cannot be reduced. So what they do is, they'll reduce that kind of expenditure which is welfare expenditure. The welfare expenditure, that means for the sake of people, a lot of discounts will be given, lot of time they're going to give subsidies to the people. So this way, these all PDS system, public distribution system, this all comes under welfare expenditure, Manrega program. So these all comes under welfare expenditures. They're going to reduce the welfare expenditure. This time, when they're going to reduce the welfare expenditure, this would mean lower the growth. Welfare expenditure is really very important for any economy. The people who are below poverty line, the people who are not able to grow faster like others, for them welfare expenditure, it's part of them, it's really very important. In this case, when welfare expenditure is going to decrease, this will lead to lesser growth and adverse welfare implications. On the other side, you have fiscal deficit. What is fiscal deficit is all about? Fiscal deficit is the difference between the government's total expenditure and its total receipts excluding borrowing. So in this case, whatever the borrowings we are going to do, we are going to exclude it. So here the formula talks about gross fiscal deficit is equal to total expenditure. So at the same time, total expenditure minus revenue receipts, non-debt creating capital receipts. So whatever the money we have, we are going to borrow that from the economy from so many sources. After borrowing, we're going to fulfill this fiscal deficit. So if deficit is a shortage, from where we're going to fill this? We're going to fill this with the borrowing. So from where we are going to borrow? For gross fiscal deficit, we're going to borrow money from net borrowing at home. What is net borrowing at home? Net borrowing at home, that means we can classify that again into direct and indirect borrowings. Direct borrowings, in that case, we're going to borrow money from the public just like a debt instrument. Indirectly, we're going to borrow money. This is a topic of net borrowing at home. Net borrowing at home, that can be classified into direct and indirect. In indirect borrowing, we're going to borrow money from the commercial bank through SLR. SLR is statutory liquidity ratio. Statutory liquidity ratio, that means each commercial banks, they have to keep some money, percentage of ratio of money into liquid form with themselves. They have to store. That's called statutory liquidity ratio. The statutory liquidity ratio topic we have already discussed in money and banking. I hope you guys remember. So here, after net borrowing, which is direct and indirect, so the next borrowing is from RBI. So we're going to borrow money from RBI. The last one is borrowing from abroad. So from the others abroad, like it can be international, any of the markets, it can be from World Bank, any other country, we're going to borrow money. So this is the way how whenever we face any fiscal deficit, we're going to fill it with a net borrowing at home and borrowing from RBI and borrowing from the abroad. After this, why gross fiscal deficit is so important? The gross fiscal deficit is a key variable in judging the financial health of the public sector and the stability of the economy. How stable it is, what is the financial health of a public sector, how government sector is working, how financially they are strong, how economy is stable. To analyze that, fiscal deficit plays very important role. Revenue deficit is a part of fiscal deficit. Revenue deficit is an individual topic. We have already studied about it previously in the same video. The revenue deficit is also part of fiscal deficit. So now you can see the formula here. Fiscal deficit is equal to revenue deficit plus capital expenditure minus non-debt creating capital receipts. That means non-debt means it is not a loan, but we are getting money from the other people. So whatever the revenue deficit we have, this is the major part in the fiscal deficit. The major part played by the revenue deficit in this non-debt creating capital. A large share of a revenue deficit in fiscal deficit indicated that a large part of a borrowing is being used to meet its consumption expenditure needs rather than the investment. Why usually we borrow money? For the sake of consumption expenditure, for the sake of investment expenditure. We have already studied that. But revenue deficit, when we have, it's a major part in the fiscal deficit. When it comes to revenue deficit, when we're going to borrow more money, the large share it is for the consumption expenditure than the investment expenditure. So the next slide we have a formulas. What is the formula of fiscal deficit? The fiscal deficit formula is total expenditure minus revenue receipts minus capital receipts excluding borrowing. On the other side, you have a revenue deficit formula, total revenue expenditure minus total revenue receipts. The primary deficit topic you do not have for this year's syllabus as a question. Primary deficit formula is fiscal deficit minus interest payments. Thank you so much. I hope you understood this concept. This is one of the 6-mark question, and this chapter, when it comes to blueprint weightage for the 2022 exam, it is really very important. So please read and understand by seeing my videos. Please, thank you so much. If you're really liking my videos, subscribe and share. Thank you.